This happened earlier last year, and it still fucks me up to think about it too much. First, a little backstory to explain. I'm a delivery driver for Uber Eats, and I've been doing it as a side gig for the past year or so to earn some extra money. Also, I'm a girl. Anyway, yeah, Uber Eats. It's a super chill job, although the pay is definitely not ideal, especially at night. Normally, any pings I get after 10 p.m. are just shitty fast food orders to customers where the chances of being tipped are even lower than normal, which is pretty low. I would say 2 in 10 people tip on Uber Eats. Whatever. Late night deliveries are rarely profitable, which is why I would barely do them. However, on this night last year, there was a bonus going on. Reach 15 deliveries in a certain time frame to get an extra $75. Music to my ears. When that's the case, late night deliveries rock because there's no traffic and it doesn't matter where you're picking up from. McDonald's schmcdonald's. Just bring on the bonuses. The faster you can get them done, the faster you get to go home and knock out. Open roads all the way it works for me. I was on a roll and finished my last Mickey D's run at 2:30 in the morning. I cashed in my bonus and called it a night. For context, this took place in downtown San Diego. Downtown San Diego has fun restaurants and clubs at the core, but as you branch out, it gets a little more seedy. Once you get past 16th Street, it starts to get really sketchy. Lots of homeless camps and the works. I actively try to avoid that area, but in order to get back home and on the freeway, I had to pass through that neighborhood. One more little piece of info. I drive a 2002 shitty Ford Focus and nothing's automatic. In order to roll the windows up or down, you have to reach over and crank the lever. Because it's a hassle to roll them up and down manually each time, when I do deliveries, I usually just keep both my windows rolled down because it's easier to pick up and deliver through the windows. This night, fuck me, I had my windows down as usual. I was planning to roll them up before I passed through 16th Street, where the homeless camp was, but I didn't get that far. As I turned down a side street heading towards the main drag, up ahead I see a man in one of those orange reflective construction vests, standing out on the side of the road. There's always some construction going on downtown, and it's pretty common for it to happen at night, so I didn't really pay much attention. As I get closer though, the man runs into the middle of the street, waving his arms, signaling to stop. I start to slow down, thinking he's going to direct traffic or reroute me or something. I brake to 10 miles per hour, then 5, leaving distance trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. He breaks out into a jog towards my car and stops directly in front of it, blocking me and my car from moving forward. Immediate unease. This is weird. I'm wishing my windows were rolled up. It's 3 a.m. on a dark street, and there's not a soul around except for me and this dude. People talk about fight or flight, and I've always wondered how I would react in a situation that warranted a similar response. Now I know my reaction is to freeze, because as I was slowing down, it hit me 5 seconds later than it should have. This guy was not a construction worker. He had on a hard hat and a vest, and the creepiest smile I've ever seen in my life. At first, I thought he was just smiling to be friendly, but smiling to acknowledge someone longer than a few seconds is super unnerving. Try it right now. Count to 5 in your head while grinning and you'll see what I mean. That's what this guy was doing. Now that he's in front of me, I can tell that he's homeless. That or just, I don't even know. Older guy, I would guess in his 60s, but homelessness has a way of making everyone look old, so who knows really. He's just staring at me now, wide-eyed and smiling, all teeth. Honestly, his smile and mannerisms, the best way I can describe it is Twisty from American Horror Story. Literally though, this guy looked insane. I obviously should have reversed, but my brain was panicking and I couldn't think that fast. I'm frozen in my car, thinking about how this is how I'm going to die. This whole time he's not saying anything, just leering. Then, like a ninja, he jumps onto the hood of my car and slams his fists against my hood. I'm frozen in terror just watching this guy. He starts pounding on the hood of my car, crawling around on hands and knees, not saying anything, just crawling and staring at me. That was the most terrifying part. He never broke eye contact once during all of this, and he never stopped grinning. The thought of my windows being open made me want to throw up, but at the same time, breaking eye contact and moving to roll them up felt scarier, like if I made sudden moves or looked away, he would try to come inside the car. He never said a word. I think it would have been less scary if he had said something, but he never did. Just pounded his fists on the car and stared. In all reality, this whole encounter probably lasted all of 15 seconds, but it felt like days to me. I'm freaking out, and before I can gain the sense to do anything remotely intelligent, I see headlights in my rearview mirror coming up behind me from down the street. The man sees them too, and in an instant, he jumps off my car and breaks off into a run behind me, heading towards the new car. Jesus Christ. I floor it and don't look back until I'm halfway home on the freeway, and at this point it's all adrenaline. For a long time after that, I stopped delivering at night. I sure as hell don't go into that section of downtown anymore. I take the longer route home, and I don't drive with the windows down at night if it's in an area even remotely run down. What I realized from this is how naive I can be, to just automatically trust and obey someone just because they have a uniform. I didn't even question slowing down at first, even though the situation was sketchy as hell. The opposite, actually. My mind was comforted by the fact I found somebody trustworthy on the road. Subconscious thoughts went, "Oh nice, a public servant doesn't want me making a wrong turn." By the time I stopped, it would have already been too late if this guy wanted to attack me. I shudder thinking about it. I calmed down eventually by reassuring myself that this was probably just a crazy dude on drugs who meant no harm. Hopefully that's the case, and for my own peace of mind, I'm going to believe that it is. But what got me is the fact that this guy was dressed as a road worker on the road, and deliberately behaving at first in a way to lead me to believe that he was one. Why else wear that getup? And why was he trying to pull cars over? Just to freak people out? I don't know the answer, and I'm glad I didn't find out what it was that he wanted from me. Yikes. This is a long one, but it was so bizarre I think it's worth telling. I wanted to post it because this person recently tried to friend my now husband on Facebook, and it brought back crazy memories and I need to vent it out. I got married at 18. I was a pretty book-smart kid but lacked street smarts. By the time I turned 20, my now ex-husband and I had moved into a rental property in a pretty nice suburb outside Chicago. In the basement of the house was a big mother-in-law suite, where a good male friend of ours, Nick, lived as well. I was about halfway through nursing school at this time. This particular semester of nursing school, I had a very early clinical rotation once a week. I was 21 at the time. I'm not a morning person, so in order to maximize the amount of time I spent asleep, I started loading all my stuff into the car the night before. Bags, books, even my purse. Again, street smarts lacking. One particular night before clinicals, I asked my ex-husband Bobby to get a book for my car. Bob does, but forgets to lock the door. The next morning when I get to my car, I note that my purse is gone. I ended up filing a police report. I was most concerned because I had just gotten this new job as a nurse's aide at a hospital, and I had my social security card still sitting in my wallet. Strike 3 for street smarts. Almost immediately, though, after the theft, strange things started to happen. We started getting ding-dong ditches at all hours of the day and night. Someone vandalized mine, Nick's, and Bob's cars with strange graffiti, Nazi swastikas, hangmen, and the like, egged our house, and slashed Nick's tires. At first, we chalked it up to the neighborhood pranksters, but when we started having damages that cost some decent money, we called the police. Not to mention, one day when Bob was mowing the lawn, he noticed piles of cigarette butts outside the bedroom window. The police came out, but pretty much did nothing but take a report, and told us to perhaps invest in car alarms and some brighter floodlights for the driveway. A few weeks after this, at 2:30 in the morning, I get a call on my cell. It was the police in a neighboring town. They had picked up someone who had my ID on him, someone named Craig J. When they asked why he had someone else's ID on him, he claimed that I was his girlfriend. The cop called me because my name had popped that I'd filed a police report for theft. I assured the cops I'd never heard of him before, and was told that I could pick up my ID at the police station within the next few days. Things really started to escalate at this point, but I still didn't make the connection that perhaps these incidents were related. I started getting strange messages on MySpace. This was in 2009, as well as on Facebook, from clearly fake accounts with long-winded messages that made no sense. This person started messaging friends of mine as well. I deleted MySpace and blocked the person on Facebook, but new accounts kept getting created. Somehow this person got a hold of my email address and started sending emails as well. I had no idea who this person could be, but they seemed to know details about me that indicated that this was either someone I knew or knew someone that I knew. The messages weren't overtly threatening, but creepy enough to where I was starting to become uncomfortable. One night, my friend Lauren and I were sitting on the couch watching TV. Bob, Lauren's husband, and a few other friends had gone out for the night. As we're sitting around chilling, we hear something that sounds like someone shaking the garage door. It was an attached garage. I go and check the garage, but nothing seems to be out of the ordinary. We had occasional issues with raccoons, so I chalked it up to that. But the noise keeps continuing. Lauren and I are getting freaked out at this point. Now understand the layout of the house. It was a modern-style ranch house with no upstairs. The garage sounds now moved to the kitchen window, a distinct sound of someone knocking or scratching hard on the windows. We call our husbands, who didn't answer. At this point, we debate calling the police. What if it's an animal or tree branches? We don't want to seem stupid. As we debate, I see Lauren's face go sheet white and look right past me. I spin around and I can see the locked handle of the front door wiggling. We were seated near the kitchen, but we both jump up. Lauren grabs a knife from the butcher block on the counter. I grab a small hammer from the junk drawer. We book it to the back of the house where the bedrooms are, cell phone in hand, and lock ourselves in one of the bedrooms and call the police. The dispatcher tells us to stay on the line, move furniture in front of the door if possible, and the police are on their way. We shove a dresser in front of the door, knife and hammer in hand. We agreed if this fucker was going to come in, he might be bigger or stronger than us, but he's not going down without a fight. We plan. If he gets in before the cops, I go for the head with the hammer, and she goes for the gut with the knife. The cops show up banging on the door, shouting police. We can see the red and blue lights through the window. We leave the room, let the cops in, and they find no signs of anyone present or evidence of an attempted break-in. They take a report. In the meanwhile, our husbands finally call us back. They come home and the cops leave. Flash forward a few months. A very close friend of ours, Sean, was renovating his apartment and needed a place to crash along with his girlfriend. Bob and I decided he could stay in the third bedroom of our house. The first night Sean stays with us, we're awakened at 2 a.m. by Sean screaming at someone. Bob and I jump out of bed and rush into the hall and to Sean's room. Sean and his girl are wide awake, lights on and looking totally freaked out. The screen is sliced, flopping in the wind. Sean told us he woke up to someone using what he thought was a knife on the screen and started climbing in through the window. We call the cops and they come out to take a statement. Sean describes the guy as best as he could. A white male, young-looking, semi-shaved head with what looked like darker hair. Cops dust for fingerprints, and they come back as a match for Craig J. Turns out I knew who he was vaguely. He was a year younger than me, and we had gone to the same high school, but I couldn't remember having any significant interactions with him. He lived with his parents only a few blocks from my parents' house. I ended up reaching out to high school acquaintances who knew him, and they remembered him as a nice but odd kid, kind of quiet but definitely on the strange side, who had dropped out of school suddenly before graduation. Upon realizing that Sean had just moved in, the cop makes a statement that chilled us all. He probably didn't realize anyone was staying in this bedroom and thought the room would be empty. Cops go there and arrest him. He suddenly has quite the story to tell them. Him and I were secret lovers. I was ignoring him. We had a relationship. He had also been allowed into my home many times. I'm floored. He gets charged with something like trespassing or breaking and entering, and does light time for it, maybe a month, and has to pay a fine. In the meanwhile, I get a restraining order on him. He gets out and I hear nothing from him. I also develop a completely irrational fear of first-floor windows. Around Christmas of 2010, I'm now 23. I figure the whole Craig thing is in the past. Bob and I decide to divorce, unrelated to this, and go our separate ways, and Nick has long since moved out. We end the lease, and I move to a less desirable suburb, but with an affordable rent. I settle on an apartment in a 4-unit building that had a locked entrance, and the only way in was with a key, or with someone opening the door from the inside. I lived on the 2nd floor. By this time, I had graduated and was now a nurse, and was now working in a nursing home. Spring or summer of 2011, it started up again. Calls coming through to me at work, only to have someone hang up. Letters suddenly appeared in the staff-only mailbox, mailed to me with no return address. The strange emails started up again from random accounts. The messages were never overtly threatening, but they were long, way too frequent, way too out there. He spoke to me as if we were long-lost friends and had some sort of connection. I don't think he ever threatened to hurt me, although the cutting into a house with a knife, I don't know what was going through his mind. What I kind of seemed to piece together over the years from all of his rambling is that he had some sort of crush on me when I was younger, although I never remember even speaking to him during high school, and him happening to rob my car was some sort of sign from the universe that we were meant to be together. I called the cops and they basically told me that because there had been no threats, and other than an OOP or a cease and desist, there's not much they can do except watch and wait. This goes on for a while, and finally, one night, I wake up at 2 a.m. to the doorbell ringing. I'm instantly in a panic. I look out the window, and there, illuminated in the floodlight, is Craig. I burst out crying. In my half-awake state, I run across the hall and start banging on my neighbor's door. He was an older divorced guy who lived alone. He goes downstairs and confronts Craig, telling him the cops have been called, and he takes off. I file a report and they claim they'll talk to him, but this only seems to make things worse. Friends I have on Facebook now start getting random messages from Craig, asking about me, telling them he has important information for me. Other times he alternates saying I owe him money and I have a debt I need to pay off. My friends block him as he goes along. Meanwhile, my younger sister is living in the city with a few friends. He somehow finds out where, and drives to her apartment and confronts her while she has people over. She freaks out and they kick him out. They call the cops, who basically again state he didn't commit a crime, but offer us a restraining order. Right after this, another incident. My younger cousin is a high school senior on the cross-country team. He shows up at my cousin's practice, but my cousin has no clue who he is. He starts demanding information on me, The coach gets involved and Craig gets into a fight with him. The cops are called, but he's banned from school grounds and nothing more. He calls the nursing home administrator at my job, asking him to talk to me and that he has important information to tell me. The administrator, my work, was now aware of the situation, tells him not to come onto the property or he'll have him arrested for trespassing. At this point, I'm paranoid beyond measure. Then, just as quickly as it started, it faded off. It's now summer of 2012, and the final caper in this saga. I'm almost 25 now. A friend of mine named Stacy, and incidentally Sean's ex, moved in with me temporarily while she looked for a place. She was dating a new guy, and spent quite a few nights at his place. One day I picked up a double shift, starting at 7 a.m. and ending at 11:30. Stacy texted me around 3:30 stating she won't be home that night and was out with her guy. I arrive home at almost midnight. The first thing I notice is that the door is unlocked. Uneasy, but thinking perhaps Stacy had forgotten to lock it, I cautiously peer inside. I pan my gaze to the kitchen and the living room. I can't shake the feeling that I'm unsettled. Something isn't sitting right. Due to all of these incidents, I've always made sure that 1 or 2 lights were on even when we weren't home. I was still not even fully in the door when I noticed that I was staring into a pitch-black apartment, and immediately my brain went into full panic. I'm glad it did. Realistically, Stacy could have forgotten to leave a light on, but my instincts were in overdrive and sounding off 5 alarm bells. My Puerto Rican neighbor, who lived in one of the building units, was well known for his weekend parties, and I could hear a party going on downstairs. I book it down the stairs and bust into the party, and I tell him what happened. He looks at me like I'm crazy, but agrees to come upstairs with me. We get inside and we look around, but we see nobody. I'm starting to wonder if I'm just nuts. Maybe Stacy had her boyfriend over and they left in a hurry, forgetting to turn on the lowlights and lock the door. He agrees with me, and sort of jokingly pulls open the pantry door. What I saw next will never leave my mind. There, crouched inside, is Craig. My Puerto Rican neighbor puts the guy in a chokehold and I call the police. To this day, I have no idea what he planned on doing. The cops come out and he's arrested. Because my neighbor was having a party, he had the door open to the alleyway. Chances are he just walked into the building, and if anyone even noticed, people would just assume he was there for the party. It's more confusing how he got into the apartment itself. My theory is, my roommate at the time was from the country, while I lived in a suburb. It was the type of suburb right on the edge of a major US city, so we always locked our doors and generally kept everything secured as a rule. She was used to leaving her doors wide open, and I honestly think it may have just slipped her mind when she went out for the night. I confronted her about it, and of course she denied it, but that's really the only logical way he could have gotten in. I always locked both the knob lock and the deadbolt whenever I left the house. Unless he was a skilled locksmith, I have no idea how he could have gotten in. I didn't stay alone or go anywhere by myself for a long time after that. I feel that I actually developed a paranoia because of all of this, and was highly suspicious of giving my number or any information out to anyone. He ended up being charged and convicted of aggravated stalking, breaking and entering, and some other charges. I did meet his parents in court, who were both, shockingly, very normal and apologetic people. They tried explaining their son. They claimed he was mentally ill and suffered from bipolar disorder. When he's medicated, he's okay. When he's off his meds, he's nuts. After he served time, I didn't hear from him for years. Not until 2016 when he found me on Facebook. I was much older now, around 29. I replied to him very firmly that any contact would end with the police being called, and that I had no interest in him at all. I blocked him any way I could. Recently he found my new husband on Facebook and friended him. He blocked him as well. To this day I still have paranoia. I had parked my car near a baseball diamond once, and some kids most likely hit a baseball into my windshield and took off, because they had a perfectly baseball-sized spider crack on the glass. Despite it being completely logical that it was most likely a ball, I instantly reverted to, oh God, is he back? I have no idea what happened to him. I'm also now a total psycho about keeping things locked. Twice my life got screwed up because the doors weren't locked. My car door, and most likely my apartment door. I have an acquaintance monitor him on Facebook. His page is not private, and from what I've seen, he appears to go through periods where he's pretty inactive, and then episodes where he's rambling, overposting, oversharing, and acting generally deranged. I believe his parents were telling the truth when they stated that when he's medicated he's okay. Part of me feels a bit bad for him. I'm older now, and I've been a nurse for almost 10 years, some of which time was spent in a psych specialty. The mind is a hell of a thing. Looking back, though, those were some of the worst years of my adult life. He put me through a lot of anxiety and caused a lot of issues for me. I slept with my couch pushed against my apartment door for the next 2 years before I moved out of there. I'm now married, but on nights where I'm home alone, I find myself resisting the urge to stack furniture in front of the doors. One of the other fallouts from this situation, Craig either sold, lost, or gave away my social security card that had been in my purse. Someone tried to file for Medicaid benefits in Arizona using my name and social, as well as obtained a job using my social and failed to pay any taxes, leaving me with a surprise asset freeze by the IRS and a whole financial mess that needed to be untangled before they unfroze my accounts. My credit got extremely messed up for years because of it, and to this day I have a lock on my social security number and monitor my accounts like a hawk. Moral of the story: never leave your purse in the car, and always lock your doors. I'm not going to lie. I basically went to college to smoke weed and go to parties. My full intention was to do just enough to get by while partying as much as I could. Unfortunately for me, I only applied to a few schools and was only accepted to one, a small college in the mountains of New Hampshire. It was very small, around 3,500 total undergrads, and I went not knowing anyone. On the first day, as I was skipping the ice-breaking games and other students were giving tours of the campus to their families before leaving, I wandered down a small path behind the cafeteria towards a small stream I had noticed during the drive-in. I lit a joint and was just meandering around when I noticed another dude a little further down the stream that cut a straightest path through the trees. He was also smoking a joint, I assumed by the way he was holding it. I made my way over to see if I'd just made my first college friend, and introduced myself. His name was Nate, and he seemed pretty cool. He was smoking some really nice herbs, so I figured I could get along well with him. He stood about 5'5" and was a little stubby, but I remember noticing that he had a really weird laugh, like a nervous type, and that whenever he laughed he'd kind of look off to the side and glance back at me from his peripheral vision. Yeah, I knew it was weird even back then, from the first time I met him, literally the first 30 seconds of introducing myself. But I thought maybe he was just socially awkward, had bad teeth, who knows. I was taught not to judge, and he was otherwise pretty normal. We ended up hanging out pretty frequently, playing video games, drinking, smoking, but other people, especially in my dorm, didn't really seem to take to him. Not that I really felt a strong bond with him either. I didn't. It was a very superficial friendship, built around drugs and debauchery, but I definitely got the sense that my other friends weren't comfortable around him. Then something weird happened, that I've managed to successfully forget about until recently. My heart is pumping out of my chest just typing this. One weekend my roommate was home for a visit, and Nate's roommate was having his girlfriend over, which basically implied in college terms that Nate was staying with me. It seemed automatic. We got trashed and smoked a ton, got pizza and played video games. I was pretty out of it, and we were both sitting in desk chairs in my room passing a bowl back and forth. When he handed the bowl to me, leaning over towards me in his chair, he put his hand over mine and said casually in a low and steady voice, I'm going to fucking kill you. Okay, so like I said, we were all sorts of fucked up, but I was definitely freaked out a little. He'd never really been aggressive before, even at his most intoxicated. Certainly, he'd never said anything like this before. I've never handled confrontation very well, so all I said was, "No, dude, don't do that, bro," and sort of laughed it off and tried to write it off as a drunk, stoned idiot, playing too much Mortal Kombat. We had a bunk bed set up in the room since it was pretty small, and I was on top. My roommate was a bigger guy, and didn't want to have to climb down to pee in the middle of the night. We had both gone to bed, but my roommate had put up Christmas lights that we just always kept on, strung along the ceiling. I'm half deaf, I should also add, so when I sleep I tend to roll onto my functioning ear to block out sounds or muffle them in my pillow. And this also means I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. Sometime during the night, I woke up feeling a little nauseous and slowly opened my eyes. Nate was standing on the edge of his mattress, holding onto the side railings of my top bunk and staring directly at my face as I was sleeping. What the fuck? My eyes got wide as I snapped awake and sat up. "What the hell, dude?" I said, backing up and bumping my head on the wall behind me. Then he turned his head and gave me that look from the corner of his eyes. The same smile and laugh that freaked me out the first day I met him. He was still holding the railings, standing on the mattress from the lower bunk. His face was lit in weird splashes of color from the Christmas lights. He took one hand from the railing and put his finger to his mouth while smiling and still looking at me sideways, and whispered, "Shh," before hopping down and leaving the room. It was about 3 a.m., and I don't know where he went that night. I never told anyone about that, and pretty much did my best to bury it and never think about it again. I avoided Nate for the rest of the year, making up excuses when he wanted to chill alone, but did end up at the same parties with him a few times. We never talked about that, and he never brought it up. I transferred to another school the following year, not because of Nate or anything, just because of financial reasons, and I did manage to forget about the weird incident. That was 15 years ago. I'm 33 now, and recently got a call from my old roommate from the school in New Hampshire, who luckily remembered my very repetitive phone number. "Man, remember that guy Nate you used to hang out with at the dorms? He killed his 2 friends with a hunting knife and fishing line on a camping trip a year ago. He said he was too fucked up to control himself. He was mixing his meds with booze and drugs, and they said he just lost it. The thing that fucks with me is wondering if he told them he was going to kill them too, and if the last thing they saw was that sideways smile that I saw when I woke up that night." What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I have a little bit of an update here for you guys. I've recently started streaming a little bit on Twitch. I don't know if you guys are interested in just hanging out and seeing a bit of gameplay of maybe Monster Hunter or some games like that, maybe a few horror games, but I'll leave a link to my Twitch in the description of the video below. As always, if you guys like the video, please leave a comment or perhaps like or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you'd like to message me, or you'd like to send in a story for me to read, or you have a suggestion for a story I should read, the links to all of my social media will be in the description of the video below as well. This includes my Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, and now, of course, my Twitch account. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible, but please guys be patient, because I do get a lot of messages, so if I don't respond to you right away within like a week or two, just be a little patient. I'll get to it as soon as I can. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the description of the email or message what the name of the story is, what the category of the story is, and how you would like to be credited in the video that the story appears in. If you guys are curious about the music used in this video, links to the music and the order in which the music appears will always be in the description below the video, so you can go ahead and check that out there. Last but not least, if you guys do enjoy my content, please take a look at my Patreon, and if you feel so inclined, maybe donate like $1 or something. Every little bit helps. It'll never be necessary, but of course, it's always an option if you guys would like to support the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the forest for some tales of park rangers. But before we do, I have a huge announcement. We've been working hard behind the scenes and trying to make something awesome for you guys. And it's ready. We are launching new merch tomorrow. So be sure to check out the link to Teespring in the description tomorrow for its launch. Here are a sampling of the products, which we're going to sell. I think they're awesome, I love them, and we've taken a lot of love and care in making them. So, feel free to get them if you want. And by this point, I think all old designs have been purged except the classic Mortis Media shirt. But these designs probably won't stick around forever, so when they're launched, be sure to get them if you want them, because I have more merch ideas coming soon. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I worked for years as an anti-poaching ranger / ecologist and field guide throughout Africa. From guiding in Kruger National Park to tranquilizing elephants near Mount Kilimanjaro and leading anti-poaching patrols in the Okavango Delta of Angola. I've seen and done a lot. I've seen infinite amounts of beauty and good, but also my fair share of civil unrest and war, murders, firefights and animal attacks, wildfires and more. Despite all the things I have experienced, one of the creatures that unsettled me the most during my time in the bush was the leopard. The following is why. Near the beginning of my career, I worked in a large national park in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. The foothills of the Drakensberg Mountains began here and climbed until you reached the border of Lesotho to the west. The park teemed with wildlife, elephants, rhino, African painted wolves and more. But in the shadows and canopies of the foothill, crevasses of the cliffs, and wet areas of the lowlands, the elusive leopard prowled. Stories about these big cats were pounded into our heads in training by the older guides. Never make eye contact with one, or you'll be dead before you know what you saw. Oi, you're right screwed if you get on them. They dig their claws into your stomach and rip your guts out. That is, if they don't come up behind you and get you by the neck. So needless to say, those of us working in the remote bush always kept our eyes peeled, ears focused and rifles loaded. I remember few things more terrifying than walking through dense forest at night, waiting to catch two eyes in your flashlight shine, staring down at you. I never did end up on the business side of a leopard, but I searched for those who did. The area's biggest industry was tourism. Every year, thousands, likely hundreds of thousands or more, streamed into the parks hoping to capture photos, memories and knickknacks. As a result, many local and foreign people became guides, hoping to find their fortune guiding these high-paying folks on expensive trips. One of these men was an Afrikaner by the name of Axel. He was a goofy but friendly enough fellow who would cruise around in his 1980s Toyota Land Cruiser, packed with tourists. However, he was notorious for breaking the rules. He would drive off trail, get closer to the animals than what was permitted, and have a terrible addiction to tobacco, which pushed him up to the light even during dry season, when the entire park was a tinderbox. Given my position as a ranger and ecologist at the time, I had many different interactions with Axel, mostly revolving around his misconduct. Despite this, I liked the guy, his personality was great, and you could always rely on him for a cigarette and a light from his black Zippo lighter. During wet season, of course. During the wet season, a deep and narrow creek cascades down from the foothills and flows into the park's largest wetland area. About a mile from the wetland, a large concrete and iron bridge offered transport over the river's raging waters. It was dry season when Alex parked his tourist-filled Land Cruiser on the bridge, so the creek bed was cracked and bone dry. He let his passengers out, as the view from the bridge to the wetland was phenomenal. He told them to stay put, as he went to take a leak. He walked to the far side of the bridge and disappeared, under the spot where the bridge connected to the top of the berm that slowly sloped 30 feet down to the bottom of the creek bed. The tourists watched him go, then resumed snapping pictures towards the wetland. Suddenly the call of a grey lory echoed out. The grey lory is more commonly known as the grey go-away bird, as it sounds like someone yelling, "Go away." Whenever us rangers heard the call, we would instantly be on high alert, as we knew the lory had sensed a predator afoot. Immediately after the lory's call, the sound of thrashing bush and a muffled scream echoed from the creek. Several tourists darted over to the side of the bridge in time to see a massive leopard bound out from under the bridge, dragging Axel's body by the neck. The grey lory continued to cry "Go away," as the leopard and Axel vanished into the dense bush. We arrived an hour after the tourists called for help and took the eyewitness accounts. We then parked our rucks and loaded our rifles to track down the leopard and the guide's body. The first thing we found was a pack of cigarettes and the black Zippo lighter scattered on the ground just under the bridge. He hadn't gone under to urinate, but rather to light up out of sight, as the act was illegal at this time of year. His last act of rule breaking killed him. We followed the blood down the creek bed to where we found a dirty boonie cap. 100 meters away we found a shoe. Soon enough, the blood trail vanished, as did the leopard's tracks. The search lasted almost 2 weeks before it was scaled back, and then shut down. Axel was never found. Almost exactly 1 year after Axel met his fate, I was working on a large reserve in Botswana. The park's biodiversity attracted a great number of visitors every year, many of whom spent the night in luxury lodges and resorts tucked away in the park's borders. Those of us who spend our nights in tents, waiting in ambush for poachers, or monitoring the movements of nocturnal species with infrared binoculars, understood the extreme danger that the African bush conceals. Many of the visitors did not. I had just used Axel's Zippo to light a braai when the radio crackled to life, telling our team to report for a search and rescue to a nearby luxury lodge. We begrudgingly packed away the meat and veggies we'd intended to cook and drove the 20 minutes to the lodge. Outside the lodge, a father and mother cried, attempting to console each other in between gut-wrenching sobs. 2 children sat next to each other on the lodge's steps, staring off into the night like they had just come back from the front lines. The other guests were gathered on the steps of their own little yurts, talking lowly amongst each other. As we dismounted the pickup, the night guard walked over to us, his face tight and grim. Leopard got their daughter, he stated in a thick Zulu accent. We told them not to sleep on the balcony. We climbed to the balcony and found a tattered hammock with a massive trail of blood leading off the edge and into the trees. A teenage tourist on vacation from Europe with her family had slept on the open-air balcony of their lodge they'd rented. At night, as the night guard had warned them, a leopard slipped into their camp, climbed a nearby tree onto the lodge's roof, and snatched the young girl in her sleep. Unlike Axel, we found her several hours later, stuffed into a large hole about 7 feet up in a tree. That night we shot the leopard dead, as is standard procedure when such an animal begins preying on humans. I have witnessed paranormal events, Morty magic, ethnic cleansing, hippo attacks, but nothing disturbed me more than getting snatched up by a predator, never to be seen or heard from again. To this day, when I'm hiking in the woods of the United States, going for a late-night run, or taking my dog out to the bathroom, I keep my eyes and lights on the bush, and a hand on my loaded pistol. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana/Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoffs to ensure no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed all our gear into saddlebags and saddle-buddied and started out. The first day and night were amazing. Beautiful scenery and amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. I love the area and wish I could go there more often. We started out on the second day and my cousin said, "You want to see something weird?" "Of course," I said. So she led me on a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling about 2 hours away from our actual path we'd laid out. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radio. It is one of those things that you plug in or wind up, and also acts as a lantern if you really need it to, but that kills the battery very quickly. I do, and out in the middle of nowhere, there's a huge coil of wire sticking out of the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large, like some buried transmission wire, but small, like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally I decided to follow the damn thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up off the ground, is strung across limbs of trees and then back to the ground. Then it snakes around rocks and finally deadens into an outlet. The outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo wooden plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no anything. Just this outlet and this desk. I'm starting to get confused as hell as to why this desk is in the middle of a forest. When my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord and plugs it into the outlet. Then it started lighting up and blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now the place where we were at had no road access, no buildings for many miles, and no other people around. And yet, there was a live outlet. Weird as hell. No spooky jump scares or bodies, just one lone, powered desk in the middle of the woods. I wish I had snapped a picture. I was in the Gila Wilderness, and a convoy of us campers/fishers were making the drive onto the dirt road from Mogollon to Snow Lake when we spotted a forest ranger guy pulled over looking in a ditch. Turns out some idiots tried to make a U-turn and didn't realize the loose rocks makes it hard to stop. They went over the edge and high-centered. We're miles from the nearest official campground, and it's early spring, and the nighttime gets pretty damn cold. We get a jeep with a winch in position and start to pull the guy out of the ditch. Off a hill comes a white dude in a purple velvet sweatsuit. He's got a walking stick, fanny pack, and the velvet sweatsuit. That's it. He's a blonde dude and pretty skinny, and comes up to us and tells us he's German and having a great time. We couldn't get over the purple velvet suit. It was like a real pimp sweatsuit. The ranger is immediately suspicious, wants to know where he's staying and where he came from. It was around 9 in the morning, and the only way he couldn't gotten where he came from was to hike for hours. The German guy is goofy as hell and points off towards the other mountain where we asked where he's staying and going. We all think it's funny, but also question how the guy is getting along with no water and no food, as the sun is intense above 5,000 feet, even if it's only 75 degrees. The German guy refuses water or any other help and just crosses the road and goes off into the woods. The ranger told us he can't really keep the guy from doing it since he seemed okay, and said he'd check a few campsites in that direction later to see if he made it. We get to Snow Lake and commence drinking like fish in order to catch fish better. That evening, the ranger pops by to tell us that nobody at any campsite had seen the dude. He radioed around and no other rangers had abandoned camps or missing campers, and they surely hadn't seen a German dude in a purple pimp sweatsuit. That's strange. The ranger rolled off duty the next day and his replacement came by to make sure the other ranger was smoking something we gave him. We assured him it all happened. Never heard another word about the German guy in the purple pimp sweatsuit, but it makes for a good story. I texted my buddy that was with me to reminisce about the German guy, and he reminded me that he looked a lot like the actor Rhys Ifans, who plays Nigel, the kicker, in the Keanu Reeves classic The Replacement. Hope that helps with the mental image. The movie came out 3 years after the camping trip, but we remember seeing the movie and thinking Nigel looked just like the crazy German. As a forest worker, I actually have a few stories that are going to creep you out. The biggest one was in northeastern British Columbia, up near the Alberta border about as far north as Fort Nelson, but no summer roads because it is a giant swamp up there. We flew in with a helicopter and 2 of us girls got dropped in a block. The helicopter dropped us all first thing in the morning and was coming back in the afternoon because he had another job in the middle. So my partner goes one way to the end of the block and I head to the far end so we can start working towards each other. I get down there doing my thing when suddenly I hear screaming, yelling, swearing, and a lot of bad, all in a female voice. Now the lady I worked with was not a swearing person, and I had never seen her angry, and this person was angry. I tried yelling back to see what was wrong to receive no answer. Then my partner radios me to find out what's wrong, as she can hear this on the wind. I had to explain to her that it wasn't me either. We decided to work together that day. It never quit until the helicopter came back and dropped off a load of our guys to help us finish off our block. Just before they landed, we heard a couple of quads speed away in the bush. We ended up with about 15 people on that block to help finish it. The helicopter flew around to find the person to see if they were in need of help, but could not even see a trail out of the block. The roads were thorough, pure muskeg swamp, and not passable by foot due to standing water and quick mud. And saying that one is my creepiest. I've even been shot at, had a pack of wolves track me for hours after killing something in my block, been stalked by bears and found dead animals, including one that was gutted and dropped so close to the driver's door of our truck that we had to crawl in from the passenger side, and my poor co-worker that I had needed to phone RCMP for 1 day as he had to come back to the office freaked out because he found a couple of pairs of skeletal feet in running shoes one day. Turns out, after some investigation, someone had shoved bear paws in shoes, which just begs the question, why? At least, they weren't human. This was in British Columbia, at the start of the feet washing up on shore of the coast too. I was a parks officer for a downtown metropolitan out in the Pacific Northwest. I saw my fair share of weird stuff on my 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. shifts, whether it be naked bike rides after parties at midnight, with about 1,000 or so naked people chilling out, the occasional couple going at it, a homeless guy attending to himself or perhaps shooting up, as well as the occasional dead body was all a part of the normal job. This one night, we were sent to investigate a tent set up relatively near the waterfront, which was generously a homeless person that was trying to stay dry for the night. So we get there around 11:30 and tell the lady inside that she has to go a few hundred yards away to an area that isn't patrolled. She fusses and complains about having to move, then mentions a man living in a cave at the bottom of a shallow ravine nearby that has been killing small animals and eating them. We ask her for more information, and she points to a general area about 50 yards away through some thick brush, the general area most people wouldn't wander past. My partner and I started to walk through the thick brush with just our flashlights and eventually stumble upon the ravine. And sure enough, there's a small opening on the side, enough for a person to fit in. I scale down about 20 feet and peek inside the opening and see what looks like a massive pile of magazines, torn pages, article of clothing, a sugar cookie tin, a gorilla costume hand, some crude-looking tools including a makeshift bow, a few knives and other generally weird stuff. Being curious and that the cave was empty, I opened the sugar cookie tin and found large amounts of what seemed to be raw animal meat. At this point I was thoroughly freaked out and decided to unask the area and inform the police of what I had found, as we didn't carry weapons. We never found what came of the guy who was staying there or what was going on, but it was definitely freaky at midnight in pitch black conditions. I was a park ranger and wildlife officer in a mountain state. I don't want to give out too much info due to high tourists and co-workers I still talk to, but the area I worked in had campsites and cabins. One night on patrol, at approximately 11:15, I got a call from dispatch about one of the cabins calling in saying something was outside harassing them. There were not too many people in the area, and it was mid-spring, and there was still some snow on the ground in some parts. Anyway, I arrived on site a few minutes later. In order to reach the cabins, you have to walk up a dirt path for about 25 to 30 yards from when you park your vehicle. Surrounding the trail and cabins is all forest. As I walked up the path, I had a very, very strange feeling of being watched, and my anxiety was going up. I arrived at the small cabin to see the fire pit was still smoldering, and lanterns and flashlights were moving around inside. I walked up the steps and knocked on the door, identifying myself. The door slowly opened up, and a lady that appeared to be in her late 30s answered. I asked her what was going on. She walked inside fast and was going on about the kids in the window. I came inside and noticed another lady around the same age and a few children ranging from ages 5 to 9, all of them wearing a look of utmost terror. The younger kids were crying. Both mothers were on full-on mum alert. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's the look and attitude of, I'll kill what tries to get my kids. She told me herself and friend's husband were up north on a hiking trail to fish in a lake and camp as they stayed at the cabin with their younger kids. When the kids were playing a game on the floor and the mothers were talking, when they heard the kids screaming and crying, the sound of horror, not "she took my toy" kind of cry. Both women ran to the children to see what happened. One of the older kids there said there was a big, dark man who was looking at them through the window and tapped on it. The lady pointed to the area, and I walked up to it. The oldest son told me it was up there and pointed to the top right corner. I took down the description from both mothers and children and went outside to check the area. As I walked around, I had my .40 caliber in hand, ready to go, because I was freaked out and still had the feeling of being watched. I yelled out to the park law enforcement officer who was out there as I shined my flashlight around. I went up to the window to see if there were any tracks, footprints, or a ladder indentation, thinking maybe it was a perv watching the kids. These windows were at least 8+ feet off the ground, but I didn't see a track nor a scuff mark in the dirt. I walked about 10 yards into the woods, looking for anything out of the ordinary. The only thing that was noticeable was my uneasy feeling. I went back and informed the family. I saw some game trails and played it cool, as I could say it was most likely a black bear, and gave my wildlife lecture on bears, people, food, and spring. I know the mothers saw right through me, but it calmed the kids. I went out to the porch with one of the ladies who asked if I had any idea what it was. I told her no, that I was stumped, but that I would be in the area until my shift ends, and that I would pass it on to the other officers, and to call back if there was another incident. I went back to my patrol truck in a speed walk, almost a jog, and called my dispatcher and the gate officers and informed them of what happened, saying I think it was a bear. I went to my personal truck, where in the back seat, in a locked gun box, I had my .45-70, and kept it with me for the remainder of the shift. I have a degree in biology. I don't believe in Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and have spent most of my life outdoors. I've had my fair share of run-ins with bears, mountain lions, bobcats, coyote, deer, elk, and moose, to name a few. I've dealt with aggressive bears on and off my job from Alaska to the lower 48. Nothing has given me as much fear, not even a deployment to the Middle East when I was in the army. I told my supervisor the whole story, knowing I won't seem crazy to him because he was a good friend. I was worried that my coworker would think some little woodland creature came and spooked me in the woods at midnight, but he gave me his 2 cents and said he believed me, and that it could have been a Sasquatch. Like I said, I don't really believe in any of that. I've never seen any evidence for myself, and to this day still have no idea what that was. The only thing I can say is to always carry a weapon when you go out into the woods, because you never know what's watching you. I used to work as a fire spotter in a remote tower deep in the woods. On any given day, I would be the only human being for miles. For a couple of weeks, every time it approached sunset, when I'd finished for the day, everything would go eerily quiet, almost like clockwork. It stood out as it wasn't normal. There's usually more noise around that time of day, along with every time I left the cabin to climb down. There was the unnerving feeling of being watched. But, for a while, it was only while climbing down. After that, I started getting the same feeling while on the ground, and it somehow felt much closer. I can only liken it to knowing you're being hunted/stalked. Not overly great when it's a 100-meter walk back to the car with nothing to put between you and whatever else might be out there. This continued on for another week, until I started hearing sorts of chirps and calls. They stood out, and everything was dead quiet. Then one day, walking back across the clearing to the car, there was a long, low, guttural growl somewhere behind me, and I noped out of there as fast as I could, and afterwards started parking the car at the base of the ladder, because screw walking around open with angry sounding, probably bitey things lurking around. A few days later, I was driving back out and spotted a movement on the upside of the road. Looked again as it disappeared into the tree line, large, long, and dark. It seemed to hang around until the end of the fire season, as the quietness and eerie feelings were gone at the start of the next. One of my best buds from college was a geologist major that ended up becoming a ranger in Southeast US. Haven't spoken in years, as is the case with age, but I remember about 8 or 9 years back, he was telling me about an old married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them coming to the park several days in a row and found out where they were visiting us from, and that they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot they'd taken pics of where he popped the question, but were having trouble. After looking at the pics and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle, then hiked with them to where he thought it would be. They found it, and he left and went back to his station at the entrance. He said he got a weird feeling once he got back, and felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. Well, once it came to lock up for the night, he still hadn't seen them, so he reported it, left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance, and went back to where he left them. He found both of them lying down, spooning along the bank of a river. Neither were alive. He called the cops, went through the 9 yards, and went home. The police were able to disclose to him their identities. Later he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they had both committed suicide by ingesting some sort of chemical/pill combination medley. They just chose to do it where they had gotten engaged at. My buddy wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad for them dying, but said that he thought they hadn't asked for his help earlier because they didn't want to think anyone had helped kill them. My dad is a forestry technician, and this happened to one of his co-workers. They were up doing some sort of job in the very most northerly part of Ontario. Anyway, it was in the middle of the night, and she was half asleep and vaguely heard something outside her tent. Then she felt something push against her tent, and the zipper slowly open. She opened her eyes and saw the head of a polar bear in her tent. Polar bears are far from the cuddly toys you see, and they are known to be super aggressive and will hunt and eat people. She laid there paralyzed with fear, thinking that was the end, and then slowly, the bear retracted its head and left. I worked for a few months as a park ranger with the Florida Forest Service at my local state forest. The creepiest thing I saw was a poor young man who had hung himself on my second week in the job. The unexplainable, though, are obviously not as cut and dry. We have children's clothes neatly folded and left on the trails, pairs of shoes in the middle of our dense burn blocks, and just a general sense of eeriness. My first few weeks on the job, I was easily spooked, but after I got into my groove of spending hours alone in the woods, it took a far bit more to shake me. When the forest goes silent, it's best to pack up and move along. I spent a summer in Wyoming, going to BLM land and other remote locations collecting data on bats and herpetofauna. I heard a lot of weird noises like mountain lions screaming, deers snorting, and what sounded like owls fighting. I woke up one morning to find 2 bull moose sleeping 20 yards behind my tent. All of this was part of my job, until one night a truck was driving towards us when we were on a BLM square in the southwestern part of the state. The truck was going over land, no roads, and was slowly driving at us. It stopped about 100 yards away, turned off the lights, and we could see a person get out. They walked a full circle around us at around 100 yards, got back in the truck, and turned around. This was after dark, and this shadowy figure did a complete circle around us. You could hear them walking through the sagebrush, and I'm sure they could hear us talking. We packed up after that, and drove to a hotel an hour away. I called the office, and told them I was taking a gun when we went back out. Didn't like having the bear mace as our only defense. By the way, BLM stands for Bureau of Land Management. I was hunting in public land with my dad, several miles from anything close to a trail. So the day goes by and not much is going on. The weather is crap and I'm not hearing distant gunshots, so I reckon the deer aren't moving much. I radio to the old man that I'm going to head back, and we make plans to rendezvous where we had split up that morning. 20 or so minutes later, I was kneeling around the edge of a pond, stripping off all my bulky camo layers. I was just messing around putting stuff in my bag while I listened to my earphones. I can't remember if I had taken my blaze orange hat off or not to remove my pullover, but I had all the appropriate gear to denote myself as a hunter in my possession. As I was digging through my bag, I thought I heard that faint bass of someone yelling. So I took an earbud out and noticed that crouched on the opposite end of the pond, there was a lone forest ranger watching me. I stood up but didn't wave, and wasn't sure if he had even yelled to me in the first place, so I didn't holler anything to him. We just kind of locked eyes for what felt like a few minutes. To be clear, we weren't doing anything illegal. My rifle was unloaded by that point, though slung over my shoulder, obscuring the fact the action was open, and were following all laws and regulations. I hunched back over to my bag, pulled out my walkie and radioed my dad. We've got company. My motives weren't nefarious. I just didn't want my dad to come blumbling down the hill and be surprised by a friendly law enforcement officer. When I looked back up, 15 seconds later the ranger was gone. I mean, he was flat out gone. So eventually I met back up with my dad and started to tell him what happened. He just replied, "Yeah, as deep back here as we are, he probably thought we were up to no good and hit the trail when he saw you hit a radio. They get ambushed like that." As someone who gets nervous and anxious around cops, it never occurred to me that it could be causing them similar anxiety too. If the worker is hearing this now, I'd like to offer you my heartfelt my bad, and to keep up the good work. I'm a forester of the US Forest Service in Northern California. I've never had anything supernatural happen to me, but it always creeps me out a little when I come across a kill site from a mountain lion. When you're by yourself or in the woods, you're just another link in the food chain, but you don't really think about it until you come across a half-eaten deer and realize a huge cat killed this thing with its face. The strangest thing I've seen would be the time I thought I was about to see a plane crash. As usual, I was working alone on a remote hillside and I saw a plane, like a full-size commercial plane, flying below the ridgeline between mountains. I thought it was going to crash for sure, but it didn't. It just weaved through and kept going. I thought it was weird to not have any logos or writing on it. And then I come to find out we're close to an Air Force base, and they were training pilots for Afghanistan. And this was not a totally uncommon thing to see in the area. I'm a woodland firefighter in the US. I fought fires all over the Northwest, Eastern Rockies, and Midwest forests, and the only thing that's ever thrown me off was fighting fires in the mountains of Northeast Wyoming, on the Bureau of Land Management's land east of Yellowstone, hiking into a recently burnt valley that was just eerie. Smoke can make that a norm, but the colors were so vibrant even after being touched by fire. Most of the trees and shrubs were unburnt, uncommon but not rare or impossible. Within a few steps of entering the base of the valley, I knew the details like I had lived there all my life, like déjà vu, but with the clarity of reality, and not a momentary second, but 20 minutes and 100 yards of hiking. To be clear, this was a place I'd never been to before, and I was hiking paths that were familiar to me as a brother. Trees I knew, scars opposite me of 20 yards away, stones that were going to be warm, almost hot to the touch, perched inches from an ice-cold stream. Before I turned corners, I knew about a rock shelf that was protecting a small pool with a lush green patch of grass the size of a small room, with small untouched trees. Green grass in Wyoming in August is fairly uncommon, and I stayed there for a moment that felt like an hour. The whole time my hairs were standing up and falling down like I was revisiting a favorite song, and the symphony of emotions like nostalgia, joy, and bliss were just washing over me. Everything felt perfect, every single detail. I finished scouting the valley, went back to my crew, and we moved on. I kept it to myself, not knowing how to explain this perfect place to everyone, let alone myself. This shook me for days. I had no way to rationalize it, and it kept me awake a few nights for the rest of the assignment. Even as we worked, ate, shared fun stories, it still gnawed at me. To this day, 4 years and countless fires fought later, I've never had an experience like it, and likely the only place I've ever desired beyond any to return again, just to touch that perfect part of the world. I've worked in Canada's north for a few years now, in oil and gas. It's pretty creepy when during night shift you realize a moose has just been standing at a tree line staring you down for an unknown length of time, or finding bear tracks crossing the tracks you made 5 minutes ago. Honestly, the silence of a snowy forest in the dead of night, hundreds of kilometers away from anything, is pretty spooky, when your only contact to the outside world is a radio channel no one's listening to. You feel pretty alone. One of the places I go hiking to a lot is a state park. It's not very popular, and most of the trails are overgrown, but thanks to this ranger there are a ton of trails, and none are so bad that you can't duck and go about your way. I see him all the time, and that in itself is strange. He'll show up 10 feet in front of you on a straight path. He's just there. So I see him all the time hiking and usually coming in and out. We've gotten friendly. I'll usually bring an axe and bow and saw, and he'll just tell me which trails could use some clearing and off I go. So this one day, we do our routine, I sign the book and that, I pack up and head off the trail and see what I can do to clear it up a bit. For me it was a normal regular hike, nothing special at all, except that I made a small campfire, roasted a few hot dogs and had a few beers for lunch. All in all, it was a wonderful, relaxing day. On the way back, the ranger sees me and leads me to his office. I've never been in it, but he's acting nervous as hell, and shows me a registration book, and my name was crossed out, like I had signed out. He asked if I noticed anyone and I said I hadn't. He just kind of said, "Oh, okay," and that was it, and told me to go on. I never did figure out what happened or why he was so on edge. I would have written it off, but now when I see him he doesn't talk much, and has always had an excuse to leave. He's still an odd ranger, even by backpacking standards. No matter what loop I do or trails I take, I see him at least twice. He's always going the opposite way each time. I can try and explain some other interactions I've had with the ranger on the trail. I swear to God he's either the fastest hiker known to humanity, or there's some stuff I can't explain. And no matter where I am in True Park, it's not that huge, I run into this guy coming towards me, always. I used to spend a lot of time in the forest near my neighborhood. It's a small strip of trees that's biggest inhabitant is a fox. I got into vulture culture / taxidermy about a year ago. I've always been a fan of zoology, and being able to look at animals in different ways is incredibly interesting. When I was getting into it, the fox in the forest had just had kids and was hunting overtime to feed them. I started kind of an exchange where I'd pick up bones and such from around the den, and if I found fresh corpses somewhere, I'd leave the meat around the den instead of wasting it. Unfortunately, this garnered me the reputation of outcast / horrible dead animal lady from most of the kids who liked to play in the forest and noticed me carrying bags of rotting animal parts around. As far as I'm aware, none of them actually knew anything about me, aside from the rotting meat and the time I accidentally busted through where a bunch of snakes live. So that should pretty well cement their opinion of me. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. My voice has gone a bit funny because it is tired. Also, I wanna get your opinion on the merch. If you like it, if you don't like it, if it can be improved, just leave it in the description. It's always helpful. I'd like to say that this video was a bit of a pain to make because Reddit was giving me errors when trying to load the stories. Error 503, that's always nice. And yeah, it's been a bit of a task finishing this video. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. A huge thanks as always to my amazing members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for your continued support. It really does mean a lot. Thanks guys. But for now, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.